This historical account has been prepared in accordance with the Truthful Documentation Act of the 84th Grand Council. All events described herein have been verified through multiple Galantica consciousness memory transfers and authenticated records from the Galactic Archives. Any inconsistencies should be reported to the Office of Historical Accuracy for immediate voiced correction. As we approach the centennial of what is now commonly referred to as the Terran Crisis, it becomes increasingly important to examine the series of decisions, miscalculations, and unprecedented variables that led to one of the most significant diplomatic and military catastrophes in our modern galactic history. The species known as humans, self-designation or Terrans, official galactic classification T3827M, were first detected by long-range Quethan sensors deployed in the outer rim of Spiral Arm 7, specifically in Monitoring Station AS-9472, during the 39th cycle of the Supreme Conglomerate's Expansion Initiative. Initially, the detection was categorized as a standard Zelbin routine observation of pre-FTL technological development and assigned minimal monitoring resources. What distinguished this particular Zelbin from thousands of similar observations was the unusually rapid technological progression curve demonstrated by the species. Analysis of their electromagnetic emissions revealed a concerning pattern. While most species require between 4,000 solar cycles to advance from primitive combustion engines to basic space travel, the Terrans achieved this transition in approximately 70 of their planetary revolutions, roughly equivalent to 0.07% of the galactic standard development timeline. High Counselor Vithamara, upon reviewing the initial reports, marked the first notation of concern in the official record. This acceleration curve exceeds all previously documented evolutionary patterns. Either our sensors have malfunctioned, or we are witnessing a statistical anomaly of unprecedented magnitude. I recommend immediate Thalden elevated observation. The Thalden was approved and implemented in the following standard cycle. Monitoring probes were deployed at the edge of the Terran solar system, and more detailed analysis began. The Galactic Xenobiological Institute conducted the first comprehensive biological assessment of Terran physiology, approximately 6 cycles after initial detection. Their findings were both fascinating and disturbing to the High Council. Terrans were classified as carbon-based bipedal organisms with the following notable characteristics. Environmental adaptability. Unlike most sentient species that evolved to specialize in specific environmental niches, humans demonstrated remarkable adaptability across extreme temperature ranges, atmospheric compositions, and gravitational conditions. This adaptability was initially considered impossible until verified through multiple observation methods. Cognitive pattern anomaly. Standard Mythkrell thought pattern analysis revealed what senior xenobiologist Dr. Jath'Kalven termed evolutionary paradox. Terran brains had simultaneously developed highly sophisticated abstract reasoning capabilities while retaining primitive threat response mechanisms typically found only in non-sentient predator species. Biological inefficiency. Humans required significant caloric intake, frequent rest cycles, and possessed numerous redundant biological systems, characteristics typically associated with evolutionary dead ends. Yet somehow, these inefficiencies had not impeded their rapid technological advancement. Psychological contradiction. Perhaps most concerning was what the Psychological Assessment Department termed the cooperation-conflict duality. Humans appeared capable of both unprecedented intraspecies altruism and devastating intraspecies violence, often within the same geographical regions and time periods. Dr. Jath'Kalven's conclusion in the official assessment has since become infamous in xenobiological circles. The species defies our fundamental understanding of evolutionary progression. They should not exist as they are. Their development pattern violates at least 17 established biological laws. They are, in essence, a biological impossibility that nonetheless exists. The Technology Analysis Division under Director Jath'Kalven conducted parallel investigations into Terran technological development patterns. Their findings further complicated the assessment process. Most concerning was not what humans had already achieved, but the nature of their innovation methodology. Unlike the methodical, incremental advancement pattern observed in 98.7% of technological species, Terrans demonstrated what was termed crisis-driven innovation spikes, periods of extraordinary technological leaps triggered by existential threats or resource competitions. Director Jath'Kalven's report included the following observation: their technological advancement appears fundamentally driven by conflict rather than curiosity. When threatened or engaged in intraspecies competition, their innovation rate increases by an average factor of 17.3. A species that weaponizes its own survival instinct into technological advancement presents unpredictable variables in any first contact scenario. The division identified several technological areas where Terrans had taken unusual developmental paths. Weapons technology. Humans had devoted approximately 28.7% of their total research resources to creating increasingly efficient means of destroying one another, a percentage higher than any other known species at a similar development stage. Information systems. Unlike the biological neural networks developed by most species, humans had created entirely artificial information processing systems, allowing for knowledge accumulation and transfer at rates that circumvented biological limitations. Space exploration methodology. Rather than the typical pattern of thorough near-space colonization before expanding outward, humans had sent exploratory probes to the edges of their solar system while barely establishing a foothold beyond their atmosphere, a pattern suggesting impatience and prioritization of knowledge acquisition over security. Energy utilization. Humans had developed unusual efficiency in extracting energy from highly unstable sources, demonstrating comfort with technologies that most species would consider too dangerous to implement at their stage of development. The final assessment included a rarely issued vortal extreme caution recommendation. This species has developed destruction capabilities disproportionate to their social stability mechanisms. In the 1844 species catalogued by this division, only 3 others have demonstrated similar patterns, all of which ultimately self-destructed before achieving interstellar capabilities. The Department of Civilization Trajectory Analysis, considered the most prestigious division of the First Contact Assessment Bureau, devoted unprecedented resources to understanding human socio-political structures. Their findings were filed under Security Classification Myth, highest restriction, and were initially accessible only to Supreme Council members. Ambassador Jath'Kalven, who led the analysis, identified several unprecedented patterns. Governance, instability. Humans had established and abandoned more than 29 distinct forms of large-scale governance within a time span where most species typically settled into a single stable political structure. Territorial fluidity. Unlike the 99.3% of species that establish and maintain static territorial boundaries after achieving industrial capability, human territorial boundaries remained in constant flux through their entire recorded history. Ideological diversity. Most concerning to the assessment team was the persistent existence of multiple competing ideological frameworks within the species, where other species typically converged toward philosophical unity as they advanced technologically. Humans appeared to generate increasing ideological diversity. Resource allocation inefficiency. Human resource distribution systems demonstrated what the economic analysis team termed deliberate inefficiency, allowing significant resource concentration despite abundant evidence of the societal instability this created. Ambassador Jath'Kalven's conclusion has since become standard teaching in all diplomatic academies. This is a species that thrives on its own instability. What would destroy other civilizations appears to be the very mechanism that drives their advancement. They have weaponized chaos itself. The completed assessment was presented to the High Council during the emergency session of the 310th cycle. The transcript of this 12-day debate has since been classified at the highest security level. but authorized historical accounts confirm it was one of the most contentious council meetings in recent history. Three primary factions emerged during the debate. The containment faction, led by High Counselor Norbert Tekmar, advocated for immediate implementation of standard containment protocols, the establishment of a quarantine field around the Terran solar system that would prevent any potential FTL development or external contact. In her address to the Council, Counselor Norbert Tekmar stated, "History has taught us that species demonstrating fractured social cohesion coupled with advanced destructive capabilities inevitably bring devastation beyond their own worlds. The pattern is clear. The precedent established. Containment is not merely prudent. It is our moral obligation to the galactic community." The observation faction, led by senior scientist Velma Castrol, argued for continued non-interference and expanded monitoring. They proposed deploying additional stealth observation platforms throughout the Terran system, while maintaining strict, non-contact protocols. Scientist Velma Castrol presented statistical models suggesting premature intervention carries greater risk than continued observation. Our models indicate a 73.6% probability that this species will either achieve social stability or self-terminate within the next 200 cycles. Hasty action based on insufficient data violates the foundational principles of the scientific consensus. The intervention faction, the smallest but most vocal group, led by military strategist Drothmova, advocated for what they termed preemptive stabilization, a euphemism for limited military action designed to halt Terran technological progression until proper assessment could be completed. Strategist Drothmovar's argument centered on threat projection. By the time this species achieves FTL capability, our models indicate they will possess weapons technology only 2.3 generations behind our current defensive systems, an unprecedented development curve. The risk asymmetry is clear. If we are wrong about containment, we face diplomatic embarrassment. If we are wrong about non-intervention, we potentially face extinction. After 12 days of debate, the Council remained deadlocked. In accordance with Provision 7.3 of the Charter of Civilizational Management, a temporary compromise was reached. Enhanced observation would continue for one standard cycle while containment preparations would proceed in parallel, with a final decision to be made at the next Council gathering. What official records fail to mention, but what has since been confirmed through multiple independent sources, is that a faction within military intelligence, led by Commander Jath'Kalven, had already initiated what was termed Contingency Protocol T9, without Council authorization. A covert fleet of 17 vessels equipped with prototype Versalith, consciousness suppression technology, had been dispatched to the edge of the Terran system with orders to implement a modified containment strategy. Rather than the standard approach of preventing Terran expansion, this unauthorized operation, intended to systematically reduce Terran technological capabilities through targeted electromagnetic pulse deployments, effectively resetting human technology to pre-digital levels without direct confrontation. The justification, according to Commander Jath'Kalven's private communications later recovered during the investigation, was straightforward. Council deliberation will continue for cycles while this threat grows exponentially. The mathematics are irrefutable. Each standard cycle of delay increases the containment difficulty coefficient by a factor of 3.7. I take this action knowing the consequences to my career and freedom, but history will validate the necessity. The fleet arrived at the edge of the Terran system during what humans would later designate as April 5, 2025. Their first action was to deploy long-range scanners to update their intelligence on Terran military capabilities and technological distribution. What they discovered altered the course of galactic history. Human technological development had not simply progressed according to projected models, it had accelerated. Somehow, Terrans had detected the faint quantum signatures of the observation probes deployed cycles earlier, and had correctly interpreted them as evidence of non-Terran intelligence. Rather than reacting with the predicted pattern of fear and societal fragmentation, the species had done something unprecedented. They had unified. The observation data showed what Commander Jath'Kalven described as civilization-wide mobilization, with a single apparent purpose: preparing for extraterrestrial contact or conflict. And worse, they were looking in exactly the right direction. The final transmitted message from Commander Jath'Kalven to military command, sent moments before implementing what would later be known as the First Strike, contained only 11 words. "They know we're here. They're ready. We have no choice now." What would later be termed the first mistake in military academies across the galaxy began with Commander Jath'Kalven's transmission of operational orders to the 17 vessels under his command. The operation, codenamed Decisive Restraint, represented what was, at the time, considered a measured and proportionate response to a potential threat. The historical irony of this designation has not been lost on subsequent generations of strategic analysts. The task force consisted of 9 Vothmaka-class suppression cruisers equipped with electromagnetic pulse generators, 5 Zethkala stealth interceptors with quantum disruptor rays, 2 Nirith-class command vessels with enhanced shielding, 1 Balthara heavy artillery platform. Notably, the inclusion of this weapons platform violated 3 separate provisions of the First Contact protocols. According to the recovered operational briefing, the mission objectives were explicitly defined. Primary objective: implement targeted technological regression through strategic deployment of non-lethal electromagnetic suppression. Secondary objective: eliminate specific technological nodes identified as potential FTL development facilities. Tertiary objective: if resistance exceeds predicted parameters, limited demonstration of force authorized to establish psychological dominance. Restraint parameters: civilian casualty tolerance not to exceed 0.07% of population. Primary population centers to remain untargeted. Biological weapons strictly prohibited. The confidence level of mission success was calculated at 99.83%, one of the highest pre-operation confidence ratings in conglomerate military history. This calculation was based on the technological disparity assessment performed by military intelligence, which classified Terran defensive capabilities as primitive and negligibly threatening. Strategic Commander Vraxi Helios, who would later serve as chief investigator of the catastrophic outcome, noted in his analysis, the operational planning demonstrated a comprehensive failure of imagination. The strategic models applied standard responses to what was, by all prior analysis, established as a non-standard species. The contradiction is both obvious and inexplicable in retrospect. The initial phase of Operation Decisive Restraint began with what military doctrine designated as the Silence Protocol, a coordinated electromagnetic pulse designed to disable all Terran satellite communications, ground-based electronic infrastructure, and power generation facilities. This standard opening move had been successfully deployed against 17 previous pre-FTL civilizations with 100% effectiveness on what Terrans would later call the Dark Friday, April 11, 2025. The 9 suppression cruisers moved into low-orbit positions around the Terran homeworld and deployed their primary pulse arrays. The expected outcome was total electronic silence across the planet's surface within 7.3 standard minutes, with an estimated recovery timeline of 30-40 Terran years. What occurred instead was the first indication that standard protocols were catastrophically inadequate. The ship's sensors registered the successful deployment of the electromagnetic pulse, but then documented something unprecedented. Approximately 62% of Terran infrastructure remained operational. Lieutenant Sevakalin, tactical officer aboard the command vessel Indomitable Reason, recorded the first indication of trouble in the operation log. Pulse deployment confirmed. Effect: significant entity below projected outcome. Anomalous shielding detected across multiple continental regions, requesting immediate tactical reassessment. Post-incident analysis would reveal that humans had, in fact, developed rudimentary quantum shielding technology, an achievement that should have been theoretically impossible at their development stage. More concerning, the shielding appeared specifically designed to counter the exact frequencies used by conglomerate suppression technology. The implications were immediately apparent to Commander Jath'Kalven, who noted in his final command log, "They were waiting for us. Not just prepared for generic extraterrestrial contact. They were specifically prepared for our technologies. The only possible conclusion is that our observation protocols were compromised far earlier than we realized." What happened next has been the subject of extensive military analysis for generations, rather than the expected confusion and disarray following a partial infrastructure collapse. Terran military forces executed what appeared to be a pre-planned response with alarming coordination. Within 17 minutes of the initial pulse attack, 36 separate missile launches were detected from locations scattered across the Terran surface, many from facilities that had not appeared in any previous intelligence assessment. The missiles themselves were relatively primitive chemical propulsion devices that posed no significant threat to conglomerate vessels under normal circumstances. However, these were not normal circumstances. The missiles did not target the conglomerate vessels directly. Instead, they detonated in carefully calculated positions in the upper atmosphere, creating what Terran military documents would later call a dispersed electromagnetic countermeasure grid. The seemingly primitive weapons contained advanced cobalt isotope warheads that generated an electromagnetic field that interfered with the Jath'Kalven stealth systems. Communications Officer Thex Ral of the Resolute Discourse transmitted the following emergency assessment. Stealth systems compromised. Repeat. Stealth systems compromised. Indigenous weapons contain unexpected technological elements. Our electronic warfare protocols are experiencing 73% degradation. We are exposed. Within the tactical logs recovered from the Balthar artillery platform, Weapons Officer Kreltoven registered the first indication of direct Terran military response. Multiple incoming projectiles detected. Primitive ballistic trajectories. Point defense systems engaging. What the conglomerate forces failed to recognize, a failure that would prove catastrophic, was that the ballistic missiles were deliberately sacrificial. Their purpose was not to damage the conglomerate vessels, but to force the activation of automated defense systems, thereby revealing the precise energy signatures and response patterns of conglomerate technology. The true Terran counterstrike began approximately 42 minutes after the initial electromagnetic pulse. It emerged not from conventional military installations, but from 6 submersed facilities in the Terran oceans, facilities that had been completely shielded from observation through methods still not fully understood by conglomerate xenotechnology experts. These facilities launched what were later designated as Adaptive Penetration Vehicles, APVs, weapons specifically designed to counter conglomerate defensive systems. What made these weapons remarkable was not their destructive capacity, which was relatively limited, but their adaptive programming. The recovered Terran military documentation described the APVs as semi-autonomous countermeasure platforms utilizing predictive modeling algorithms to continuously modify approach vectors, electronic signatures, and penetration methodologies based on real-time analysis of target defense responses. In more direct terms, the humans had created weapons that learned from their opponents in real time. The first APV to reach a conglomerate vessel, the suppression cruiser Inevitable Harmony, was initially intercepted by standard defense protocols. However, the second APV adjusted its approach based on observed defense patterns. The third incorporated adjustments from both previous attempts. By the 7th attack wave, the APVs had identified 4 distinct vulnerabilities in conglomerate shield configurations. The tactical log from the Inevitable Harmony, transmitted moments before its communication systems failed, contains the following assessment. Defense systems unable to establish targeting lock. Incoming weapons demonstrating impossible adaptation rates. They are learning faster than our systems can respond. Request immediate tactical withdrawal. Within 73 minutes of the initial engagement, 3 conglomerate vessels had been disabled by surgical strikes to their propulsion systems, not destroyed, disabled. The precision suggested not just technological sophistication but strategic restraint that military analysts had considered beyond Terran capabilities. The unexpected resistance prompted Commander Jath'Kalven to implement contingency protocols that had not been authorized by the High Council. In his final transmitted strategic assessment, he wrote, "Encounter parameters have exceeded all projections. Terran technological sophistication suggests deliberate deception in their public electromagnetic emissions. This species represents a clear and present existential threat to conglomerate security. Implementing Protocol Omega-7. Protocol Omega-7 authorized the deployment of kinetic orbit-to-surface weapons, specifically 14 tungsten rods housed aboard the Balthar artillery platform, each rod measuring approximately 30 meters in length and weighing 36,000 kilograms, was designed to impact with the force of a small nuclear device, but without radiation effects. The targets selected were not population centers but what intelligence had identified as key military research facilities, concentrated in regions designated as North America, Eastern Europe, and East Asia. The expected outcome was immediate Terran capitulation following the overwhelming demonstration of conglomerate military superiority. The rods were launched at 0317 Conglomerate Standard Time. None reached their targets. What happened instead has fundamentally altered conglomerate military doctrine regarding pre-FTL civilizations. Moments after the kinetic weapons began their descent, multiple energy signatures activated across the Terran surface. These signatures had not appeared in any previous scan because, as later analysis would confirm, the entire system had been maintained in a zero-energy state until activated. The system, which Terran military documents referred to as Project Sky Shield, consisted of 37 ground-based energy projectors distributed across the planet's surface. Individually, each projector generated an energy field too weak to affect a kinetic projectile. However, the projectors worked in concert, creating overlapping fields that grew exponentially in strength where they intersected. The kinetic rods did not simply break apart or detonate prematurely. They were systematically redirected, their trajectories altered with such precision that 12 of the 14 rods were sent back into space on courses that would eventually intersect with the outer planets of the Terran solar system. The remaining 2 were guided to impact in uninhabited ocean regions. The implications were staggering. The Terrans had not only anticipated the attack, but had developed a defensive system specifically designed to counter it, a system that required a unified global effort and technological sophistication that should have been centuries beyond their capabilities. More disturbing was the evidence that humans had deliberately concealed this capability. Their public communications had projected technological development consistent with early space exploration, while secretly they had developed defensive systems approaching Tier 2 conglomerate standards. Science Officer Velm Thorel of the command vessel Indomitable Reason transmitted what would become the most quoted assessment of the engagement. This was not luck. This was not a desperate defense. This was a trap, carefully laid and patiently waiting for us to spring it. They wanted us to attack. They wanted to assess our capabilities under combat conditions while revealing only a fraction of their own. The final phase of the first engagement began approximately 3 hours after the failed kinetic strike. Terran military facilities, now operating without any attempt at concealment, launched what appeared to be conventional orbital missiles. These weapons were notable for their lack of sophistication. They utilized chemical propulsion, contained no advanced guidance systems, and carried no warheads that conglomerate sensors could detect. The apparent primitiveness of these weapons led to a fatal error in tactical assessment. Rather than initiating immediate withdrawal, Commander Jath'Kalven ordered standard interception protocols, assuming the missiles represented a desperation tactic rather than a strategic threat. The missiles, as designed, were intercepted by conglomerate defense systems approximately 100 kilometers from their vessels, What was not anticipated was that interception was the intended outcome. Upon destruction, each missile released thousands of microscopic particles, later identified as self-assembling nanomachines, utilizing simplified quantum entanglement principles. These particles, individually harmless, began systematically infiltrating conglomerate vessel systems through radiation exchange ports, atmospheric cycling mechanisms, and communication arrays. Within 17 minutes of first particle contact, conglomerate vessels began experiencing cascading system failures. Propulsion, weapons, life support, and communications were systematically compromised by what appeared to be a coordinated attack on the fundamental command architecture of conglomerate technology. The final transmission from Commander Jath'Kalven's vessel was fragmented due to communication system degradation, but the recovered portions reveal the full magnitude of the strategic disaster. Completely infiltrated systems failing. They are in our networks. Impossible response time. Recommend immediate quarantine of all. Do not attempt rescue. They are not what we thought. They have been waiting. I repeat, they have been waiting for us. What has been officially designated as the first engagement concluded with an event that continues to confound strategic analysts and xenopsychologists alike. With 13 of the 17 conglomerate vessels disabled and drifting in Terran orbit, completely vulnerable to any follow-up attack, the Terrans did something unexpected. They stopped. No further offensive actions were taken. No attempts to board the disabled vessels were detected. Instead, a single transmission was broadcast toward the remaining operational conglomerate command ship, the Indomitable Reason. The transmission contained a simple text message in perfect conglomerate standard language. We did not start this conflict, but we are prepared to end it. Your vessels will be allowed to withdraw once repairs are completed. Our diplomatic representatives are prepared to establish communication whenever you are ready. We suggest you consult your High Council before further action is taken. This message, particularly the explicit reference to the High Council, an entity never mentioned in any public Terran communication, sent shockwaves through the conglomerate leadership. It confirmed what many had begun to suspect. The Terrans had not only detected conglomerate observation, but had somehow gathered detailed intelligence about conglomerate political structures and military protocols. The disabled vessels, contrary to all expected outcomes, were not destroyed. Instead, the nanomachines that had infiltrated their systems initiated self-repair protocols after approximately 7 hours, restoring minimum functionality, just enough for the vessels to initiate withdrawal, but not enough to re-engage weapons systems. Colonel Mason Reynolds, who would later be identified as the commanding officer of Terran Orbital Defense Initiative, appended a personal message to the official communication. We could have destroyed your vessels. We chose not to. Remember that when you report back to your leaders, this is the only warning you will receive. The remaining functional conglomerate vessels initiated emergency FTL withdrawal, returning to conglomerate space with news of what Strategic Command would designate as the most significant military disaster in 17 cycles. As the vessels departed Terran space, long-range sensors detected unprecedented activity across the Terran surface, manufacturing facilities activating, orbital platforms being deployed, and energy signatures suggesting rapid military mobilization on a planetary scale. The humans were preparing for war, and they had just demonstrated that they were far more capable of waging it than anyone in the conglomerate had believed possible. The final assessment in the classified report submitted to the High Council contained a warning that would fundamentally alter the conglomerate's approach to first contact protocols. The species we believe to be primitive has revealed itself to be anything but. They have not only anticipated our arrival, but specifically prepared for hostile engagement. Their technology, while seemingly inconsistent and patchwork, demonstrates innovation methodologies we have not encountered before. Most concerning, they have shown strategic restraint that suggests a long-term tactical vision. They did not merely defend against our attack. They analyzed us. They now possess direct knowledge of our weapons systems, our tactical doctrines, and our technological vulnerabilities, and they have demonstrated capabilities specifically designed to counter ours, suggesting they have been observing us far longer than we realized. We did not discover the Terrans. They discovered us. The return of the battered remnants of Commander Jath'Kalven's fleet triggered an unprecedented crisis within the galactic conglomerate. The High Council convened an emergency session that would last for 23 consecutive cycles, the longest continuous deliberation in recorded history. The transcripts, partially declassified only after the Terran Accords, revealed the magnitude of the institutional shock that rippled through the conglomerate's governing bodies. High Counselor Norbtekmar opened the proceedings with uncharacteristic bluntness. We face an existential crisis unlike any in our history. A species we classified as pre-spacefaring has not only repelled our most advanced military technology, but has done so with weapons specifically designed to counter our systems. The implications are clear and terrifying. They knew we were coming. They have been preparing for us specifically, and they now possess detailed knowledge of our capabilities. The tactical analysis from military command contained observations that fundamentally challenged the conglomerate's understanding of technological development. The Terran defensive systems demonstrate quantum engineering principles that our own scientists developed only 3 cycles ago. Yet their implementation methodology is entirely novel, utilizing resource-efficient approaches our engineers had not considered. They have not merely matched certain aspects of our technology. In several domains, they have surpassed them through alternative development paths. Most concerning to the High Council was the evidence that humanity had been practicing strategic deception on a planetary scale. The electromagnetic emissions monitored by conglomerate observation platforms for decades had projected an image of a species in the early stages of digital technology development. The capability demonstrated during the engagement suggested something far different, a civilization that had made extraordinary technological leaps in secret. The debate centered around a critical question: how had the humans achieved this without detection? 3 primary theories emerged. The indigenous development theory: humans had independently developed advanced technology through unique innovation methodologies. The contamination theory: an unknown third party had provided humans with advanced technology, potentially as a proxy conflict strategy. The temporal anomaly theory: the most disturbing possibility that the humans possessed some form of predictive capability or temporal technology that allowed them to prepare for specific future threats. Science Counselor Velmkastril, who had initially advocated for continued observation rather than intervention, submitted a formal statement that has since become a standard warning in first contact protocols. We fundamentally misunderstood what we were observing. The Terrans' visible technological development was merely the surface of a much deeper capability. While we watched their public infrastructure, they were building something else entirely, something specifically designed to counter threats like us. The most troubling conclusion is unavoidable. They anticipated not just the possibility of hostile extraterrestrial contact, but our specific methodology. Following the withdrawal of the conglomerate fleet, a period of 70 Terran days passed without any direct action from either side, a time frame that historians have come to call the 70-day silence. This period was anything but silent for either civilization. For the conglomerate, it was a time of frantic military mobilization. Records from the Strategic Command archives indicate that 27 battle groups were redirected from various sectors toward the Terran system, the largest concentration of military force assembled since the hive mind incursion 300 cycles earlier. For humanity, these 70 days represented what Terran military historians would later call the Great Reveal. Analysis of electromagnetic emissions from the Terran homeworld during this period shows a dramatic shift. The carefully maintained facade of limited technological development was abandoned completely. Instead, there was evidence of massive industrial mobilization across all continental regions. orbital observation platforms detected extraordinary activity in previously hidden facilities. Most notably, construction began on what appeared to be large-scale propulsion systems at 7 locations around the planet. Systems that bore similarities to conglomerate FTL drive configurations, but with significant modifications. Strategic analysts noted with alarm that humans appeared to be reverse engineering and improving upon conglomerate technology at an unprecedented rate. The disabled vessels from Commander Jath'Kalven's fleet, rather than being destroyed, had been systematically studied. Components had been removed, analyzed, and in some cases improved upon using methodologies that conglomerate engineers found difficult to comprehend. Admiral Zothvarax, who would later command the conglomerate's main battle fleet, submitted a troubling assessment to the High Council. The humans are not merely copying our technology, they are fundamentally reinventing it according to principles we have not explored. They approach technological development from cognitive frameworks entirely foreign to our scientific tradition. The result is not crude imitation, but elegant innovation that exploits weaknesses in our systems we did not know existed. Perhaps most concerning was the recovery of partial communications intercepted from Terran military command structures. These communications revealed a species that had rapidly unified its political and military organizations in response to the confirmed extraterrestrial threat. Nations that had been engaged in protracted conflicts suddenly established unexpected alliances. Resources were pooled, research was shared, and a coordinated global defense strategy emerged with remarkable speed. One intercepted communication between Terran military leaders, later identified as General Thomas Wilson and Admiral Hiroshi Yamamoto, was particularly troubling. They've shown their hand too early. The attack pattern, the weapons deployment, even their retreat protocols, it's all consistent with the Proxima Centauri observations. Plan Thermopylae can be accelerated. The Jupiter shipyards need to move to full production immediately. The reference to Proxima Centauri observations suggested humans had been monitoring conglomerate activities beyond their own system, a capability that should have been technologically impossible at their development stage. The first indication that humanity was preparing an offensive rather than merely a defensive posture came on the 71st day following the initial engagement. A conglomerate, long-range scout vessel, the Endless Inquiry, detected an anomalous energy signature at the edge of the Terran solar system. The signature bore similarities to conglomerate FTL drive technology, but with distinct variations that the vessel's sensors could not precisely categorize. Within 17 hours, similar energy signatures were detected at multiple points throughout the system, each approximately equidistant from the others, forming what tactical analysts would later describe as a strategic perimeter grid. The Endless Inquiry adjusted its position to investigate one of these signatures more closely. According to the vessel's final transmission, they encountered what appeared to be an unmanned platform of Terran design. The platform was described as geometrically complex, with multiple interlocking field generators arranged in configurations inconsistent with standard drive theory. The transmission ended abruptly. When a follow-up scout vessel reached the Endless Inquiry's last known coordinates, they found no trace of the ship or the Terran platform. Instead, they discovered a spatial anomaly, consistent with a localized distortion of the fabric of space-time, a technology that, according to conglomerate understanding, should have been impossible for a pre-FTL civilization to achieve. More concerning was what happened next. Similar spatial anomalies began appearing at seemingly random coordinates throughout a 20-light-year radius around the Terran system. Conglomerate vessels approaching these amons reported sensor ghosts, navigation system failures, and in 3 documented cases, complete power loss followed by systems restoring with evidence of external reprogramming. Admiral Krentovar, commander of the Third Fleet, submitted an emergency assessment. The Terrans appear to have developed what can only be described as spatial warfare capabilities. They are not merely defending their system, they are reshaping the tactical environment itself. Our sensors cannot distinguish between genuine threats and artificially generated sensor echoes. They have created an environmental weapon from the fabric of space itself. The deployment of these devices, which Terran military documents would later refer to as Horizon platforms, represented the first phase of what humanity had designated Operation Phalanx, the creation of a multi-layered defensive perimeter extending far beyond their solar system. The evidence of humanity's unexpectedly advanced capabilities triggered a significant escalation in the conglomerate's response. The High Council, after 3 days of emergency deliberation, authorized the deployment of weapons platforms that had previously been restricted under the Sentient Species Preservation Accords. The first of these platforms, designated Inevitable Conclusion, arrived at the edge of Terran-controlled space, 93 days after the initial engagement. The platform housed what was, at the time, considered the most destructive non-prohibited weapon in the conglomerate arsenal, a directed quantum destabilizer capable of inducing cascading molecular failure across an entire planetary surface. The operational plan was straightforward. The platform would establish position beyond the range of detected Terran defenses and target critical infrastructure, not population centers, to force capitulation through demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority. What happened instead has been studied by military strategists for generations since. As the Inevitable Conclusion prepared to fire its primary weapon, Terran defensive systems activated with unexpected coordination, not from the planet as anticipated, but from thousands of small, previously undetected platforms distributed throughout the solar system in an arrangement that conglomerate tacticians would later call the perfect ambush geometry. These platforms, no larger than standard transport shuttles, simultaneously generated focused energy fields that individually posed minimal threat. However, these fields were precisely calibrated to intersect at the exact coordinates of the Inevitable Conclusion. The overlapping fields created what Terran military documents called a cascade resonance effect, essentially turning the platform's own energy generation systems against itself. The resulting detonation was visible across 12 light-years. What made this counterattack particularly significant was not merely the destruction of the conglomerate's most powerful weapons platform, but the method. The Terrans had not merely defended against the attack, but had repurposed the energy of the weapon itself as a component of their defense. Strategic Command's assessment was uncharacteristically direct. The humans are not fighting according to any recognized doctrinal approach. They are not attempting to match our technological superiority in direct confrontation. Instead, they are systematically identifying the fundamental principles underlying our technology and developing methodologies to subvert those principles against us. They are not fighting our weapons. They are fighting our comprehension of reality itself. 117 days after the initial engagement, conglomerate deep space monitoring stations detected an unprecedented energy surge from within the Terran system. The surge originated from what had previously appeared to be a small research outpost in orbit around their 6th planet, a gas giant they called Saturn. Within hours, similar energy signatures appeared at multiple locations throughout their system, each growing exponentially in strength over the following days. Analysis suggested the Terrans had activated some form of advanced energy generation technology significantly beyond what their previous emissions had indicated they possessed. The nature of this technology became apparent when a previously undetected Terran vessel emerged from the orbit of their 8th planet and accelerated to FTL velocities using a drive system unlike any in the conglomerate database. Science Officer the Valorax of the monitoring station Distant Vigil provided the first analysis. The Terran drive system appears to generate a localized distortion field that does not merely bend space-time according to standard theory, but actively reconfigures its fundamental properties within a contained field. The energy requirements for such a system should be beyond any civilization without Dyson-scale power collection, yet they appear to be generating this energy through a methodology our sensors cannot categorize. This vessel, later identified in Terran military records as the TDF Prometheus Unbound, represented the unveiling of what humanity had designated Project Breakthrough. the development of an entirely novel approach to FTL travel that did not rely on the same physical principles as conglomerate drive technology. What made this achievement particularly alarming to conglomerate strategic analysts was not merely that humanity had developed FTL capability decades or centuries ahead of their projected timeline, but that they had developed an approach fundamentally different from, and in several key aspects, superior to the conglomerate's own technology. The true strategic implications of humanity's technological leap became apparent 23 days later, when a fleet of 17 Terran vessels matching exactly the number in Commander Jath'Kalven's original attack force appeared simultaneously at 17 different conglomerate military outposts across a 70 light-year radius. These vessels made no aggressive moves. They simply appeared in close proximity to critical conglomerate defensive installations, broadcasted their presence on all conglomerate communication frequencies, and remained in position for precisely 1 hour before disappearing again. The message was unmistakable. Humans now possessed the capability to strike anywhere within conglomerate space. The psychological impact was devastating. A civilization that had considered itself technologically superior now faced a species that could penetrate their defensive perimeter at will. High Counselor Drethmalik's message to the Military Strategic Command reflected the growing sense of existential crisis. They could have attacked any of these installations. They chose not to. This was not a military action, it was a diplomatic statement, delivered through military means. They are communicating their capabilities while simultaneously demonstrating restraint. We cannot determine if this represents admirable civilization development or the most sophisticated psychological warfare strategy we have encountered. The Terran fleet's ability to appear and disappear with such precision, a maneuver that Terran military documents referred to as the Terran Protocol, suggested their FTL technology incorporated capabilities beyond simple faster-than-light travel. Analysis of sensor data indicated the vessels did not merely travel through space, but potentially manipulated its properties in transit, allowing for precision emergence at predetermined coordinates without the detection signatures associated with conventional FTL travel. The most significant turning point in the escalating conflict came not through further demonstrations of technological superiority, but through an act that conglomerate xenopsychologists still struggle to categorize within standard species development models. 143 days after the initial engagement, a conglomerate research outpost in the outer reaches of Sector 77-3, far from the primary conflict zone, suffered catastrophic life support failure due to a cascading reactor malfunction. The outpost housed 40,376 scientific personnel and their families, including 912 juveniles. Standard emergency protocols were implemented, but the severity of the damage meant that evacuation vessels would arrive approximately 7 hours after life support reached critical failure. The personnel aboard the station prepared for what appeared to be inevitable death. 43 minutes before life support was projected to fail completely, 3 Terran vessels emerged from FTL directly adjacent to the station. Rather than attacking, they established a stable electromagnetic field around the station that temporarily reinforced its structural integrity. More significantly, they deployed what appeared to be emergency atmospheric generation systems, specifically calibrated for conglomerate biological requirements. The lead Terran vessel established communication with the station using perfect conglomerate linguistic patterns. The message, later recovered from station logs, was simple. We detected your distress signal. Evacuation vessels are inbound to your location. We will maintain life support until they arrive. This is not a military action. Medical personnel are standing by if required. When conglomerate evacuation vessels arrived, the Terran ships withdrew to a respectful distance, but remained present until all personnel had been safely evacuated. Before departing, the Terran fleet commander, identified only as Captain Andrea Sullivan, transmitted a final message. Your scientists were studying methods to weapons counter gas against organic neural systems like ours. We know this. We knew this before we came to help you. Remember that we saved your children despite knowing this. The impact of this action resonated throughout conglomerate society. A species that had been portrayed in military briefings as an existential threat had demonstrated not merely technological sophistication, but ethical development that many conglomerate citizens found uncomfortable to reconcile with the ongoing military escalation. Ambassador Throlverden, who would later play a crucial role in the negotiation of the Terran Accords, submitted a controversial assessment to the High Council. We have fundamentally misunderstood what we are facing. The Terrans are not merely a technological anomaly, but potentially represent a unique developmental path we have not previously encountered, a species that has retained what we would consider primitive emotional and ethical frameworks, alongside advanced technological development. They are capable of both devastating military action and profound compassion, sometimes within the same strategic decision. The conflict reached its decisive turning point 179 days after the initial engagement. The conglomerate's main battle fleet, consisting of 347 vessels and representing the largest concentration of military power in the known galaxy, established position at the edge of the Terran system with the explicit intent of forcing unconditional surrender through overwhelming demonstration of force. Fleet Admiral Jath'Kalven transmitted what was intended to be the final communication before military action commenced. To the governing authorities of the planet, designated Terra, your technological achievements have been acknowledged and your defensive capabilities respected. However, the combined might of the galactic conglomerate now stands ready to enforce the established order of civilizational development. You will immediately surrender all FTL-capable vessels, dismantle your defensive grid, and accept conglomerate supervision of your technological development. Failure to comply within one planetary rotation will result in decisive action. The Terran response came not through communication channels, but through what would later be designated the single most significant technological demonstration in the history of interspecies conflict. At precisely the moment the ultimatum expired, sensors across the conglomerate fleet detected an unprecedented spatial anomaly forming at the Lagrange point between the Terran planet and its moon. The anomaly expanded rapidly, demonstrating energy readings that exceeded the combined output of the entire conglomerate fleet by a factor of 17. For 23 minutes, the anomaly continued to grow while conglomerate sensors struggled to categorize its nature. Then, without warning, it stabilized into what tactical analysts could only describe as a controlled spatial rupture, a phenomenon that should have been theoretically impossible according to conglomerate understanding of physics. Through this rupture emerged a single Terran vessel of unprecedented scale, approximately twice the size of the largest conglomerate dreadnought. The vessel bore the designation TDF Oppenheimer and appeared to incorporate technological elements completely foreign to conglomerate engineering principles. Most significantly, the vessel did not generate any recognizable power signature despite its obvious energy requirements. Instead, sensors detected what appeared to be a self-contained spatial distortion at its core, as if the vessel were drawing energy from the fabric of space-time itself. The Terran response was transmitted not just to the conglomerate fleet, but to every communication system across conglomerate space, simultaneously, a feat that demonstrated control of subspace communication networks that should have been inaccessible to them. We did not begin this conflict, but we are prepared to end it. The vessel before you represents a fraction of our developmental trajectory since you forced us to accelerate our timeline. We have spent 70 years preparing for this moment, not because we detected your observation, but because we have observed you for far longer than you realize. We offer you this choice: withdraw your forces, acknowledge our sovereignty, and engage in meaningful diplomatic exchange, or witness capabilities we have thus far chosen to withhold. You have 30 minutes to begin withdrawal procedures. After that, we will provide a demonstration that will leave no doubt about the outcome should you choose conflict. We would prefer peace, but we have prepared for war across generations. The choice is yours." Fleet Admiral Jath'Kalven's response, transmitted after 17 minutes of consultation with the High Council, represented the most significant strategic reassessment in conglomerate military history. "We acknowledge your message and recognize the sovereignty of your species. Withdrawal procedures have been initiated. We request the establishment of diplomatic channels to prevent further misunderstanding between our civilizations." As the conglomerate fleet began its withdrawal, sensors detected the Terran vessel generating what appeared to be a small-scale version of the spatial rupture through which it had emerged, a deliberate demonstration that the technology could be weaponized if necessary. The message was clear. Humanity possessed the capability to create and control spatial distortions on a scale that could potentially threaten not just military assets, but the stability of space-time within conglomerate territory. The era of conglomerate technological superiority had ended. In his final assessment before being relieved of command, Fleet Admiral Jath'Kalven wrote what would become the defining statement of the conflict. "We did not lose a war today. We discovered that we had already lost it before it began. The humans were not developing in isolation. They were studying us, analyzing our weaknesses, and preparing countermeasures specific to our technologies. More concerning, they appear to have developed entirely novel approaches to physics that our science had not considered possible. The strategic balance has not merely shifted, it has been fundamentally rewritten. We must accept the reality that we now face a civilization that has not only caught up to our development in specific domains, but has potentially surpassed us through alternative technological pathways. The humans do not think as we do not develop as we do, and do not fight as we do. And that is precisely why they have won. The formal cessation of hostilities between the galactic conglomerate and the Terran Defense Force was negotiated not on either party's homeworld, but in a hastily constructed facility on Luna, Earth's sole natural satellite. This neutral ground symbolism suggested by the humans represented the first of many diplomatic innovations that would reshape interspecies relations in the cycles to come. The conglomerate delegation arrived with expectations shaped by numerous previous encounters with technologically emergent species. They anticipated demands for territorial concessions, technology transfers, and punitive reparations, standard terms dictated by victorious powers throughout galactic history. The negotiation team had been authorized to concede significant territories and resources to limit the damage to core conglomerate interests. What they encountered instead fundamentally challenged their understanding of interspecies conflict resolution. The Terran Diplomatic Corps, led by Ambassador Eleanor Harrington, presented terms that notably lacked any territorial demands. Instead, their primary requirements centered around recognition of sovereignty, establishment of communication protocols, and mutual defense guarantees. Ambassador Jath'Kalven, who headed the conglomerate delegation, recorded his bewilderment in his personal communications. "They have the capacity to demand virtually anything. Our military assessment indicates their spatial manipulation technology could potentially threaten systems as far as the seventh quadrant, yet they ask merely for recognition and communication. Either this represents unprecedented restraint or a form of strategic subtlety beyond our analytical frameworks." Most perplexing to the conglomerate delegation was the humans' insistence on the establishment of a cultural exchange initiative as a cornerstone of the peace treaty. This program would facilitate not merely diplomatic relations, but the exchange of artistic, philosophical, and scientific knowledge between civilizations, a concept that had no precedent in conglomerate foreign policy. The Treaty of Luna, officially signed on what Terrans designated as December 17, 2025, contained provisions that would fundamentally reshape galactic politics. Mutual Recognition Clause. The conglomerate formally acknowledged humanity as a sovereign spacefaring civilization with all associated rights under the Galactic Charter, a document humans could not possibly have known about yet specifically referenced in their proposed treaty text. Non-aggression protocols. Both parties committed to notification systems for military movements within 20 light-years of their respective territories. Technology Limitations Agreement. Humans agreed not to deploy space-time manipulation technology for offensive purposes, a limitation they themselves proposed despite the tactical advantage this technology provided. The Sentinel Accords. Perhaps most significantly, Earth would maintain a demilitarized zone extending 5 light-years from their system, but retained the right to deploy Sentinel platforms for early warning purposes, a compromise that effectively created a buffer zone between human and conglomerate space. The Knowledge Exchange. The establishment of the first galactic library outpost in the Sol system, allowing controlled sharing of scientific and cultural knowledge between civilizations. The treaty's most unusual provision, however, was found in Article 7, Section 3, what would later be known as the Transparency Clause. Earth demanded that all communications regarding humanity within the conglomerate's governing bodies be made available to Terran oversight committees, while offering reciprocal access to their own diplomatic deliberations, as Ambassador Harrington explained to her confused conglomerate counterparts. Trust cannot exist within information asymmetry. We understand your civilization has observed ours for generations without our knowledge or consent. The imbalance created by this history can only be rectified through radical transparency. Moving forward, the Treaty of Luna was ratified by the Conglomerate High Council after 16 days of contentious debate, a process the humans insisted on observing as their first implementation of the Transparency Clause. What the Terran observers witnessed was a governing body in the midst of an ideological crisis, triggered by humanity's unexpected approach to conflict resolution. The aftermath of the Treaty of Luna triggered what xenosociologists would later term the Great Reconsideration, a period of unprecedented institutional self-examination throughout conglomerate society. The conflict with humanity had not merely challenged military doctrines, but had fundamentally disrupted the civilizational narrative that had guided conglomerate expansion for thousands of cycles. High Counselor Vothamar articulated this crisis in a private session that was, to the Council's discomfort, observed by Terran representatives under the Transparency Clause. We have built our understanding of civilizational development on what we believe to be universal constants, predictable technological progression paths, standardized societal responses to existential threats, consistent patterns in species cognitive evolution. The humans violate every model. They achieved in decades what should have required millennia. They respond to aggression with measured restraint rather than escalatory retaliation. Most concerning, they appear to have developed entirely novel technological approaches rather than following the expected sequential discoveries. The implications extended beyond military and diplomatic concerns. Philosophical foundations that had guided conglomerate society were suddenly questioned. The belief in the conglomerate's role as the mature steward of less developed species, a core justification for its interventionist policies, collapsed when confronted with a species that had not merely caught up technologically but had potentially surpassed them in specific domains. Science Counselor Velm Castrol submitted what would become known as the Paradigm Collapse Assessment. We are confronting not merely a new species, but a fundamental challenge to our understanding of sentient development. The humans appear to have achieved their technological sophistication through cognitive frameworks entirely unlike our own. They do not merely arrive at different conclusions, they ask different questions. This suggests that our understanding of intelligence itself may be critically incomplete. Within 90 days of the treaty signing, the conglomerate had established the first academic discipline dedicated to studying a single species. Terran studies became the most sought-after specialization across conglomerate research institutions. The field attempted to understand not just human technology but the cognitive and cultural foundations that had produced such unexpected development patterns. Perhaps the most significant shock to conglomerate understanding came not from human technology, but from the revelation of human societal structure. As diplomatic exchanges increased, the conglomerate discovered that humanity was not the unified monolithic entity they had appeared to be during the conflict, but rather a complex tapestry of nations, cultures, languages, and ideologies that somehow function together despite profound differences. Ambassador Jath'Kalven's report to the High Council attempted to explain this seemingly paradoxical structure. The humans maintain thousands of distinct cultural identities, hundreds of governance systems, and dozens of competing economic models, all within a single planetary system. What we perceived as a unified response to our incursion was in fact an ad hoc coalition of entities that, by their own historical records, had been engaged in conflict with one another less than a century earlier. Most remarkable is not that they unified against our forces, but that they maintained this unity despite returning to their internal political differences immediately afterward. They appear capable of simultaneously maintaining competitive internal dynamics and cooperative external postures, a socio-political flexibility we have not observed in any previous species. The discovery that humans had set aside thousands of years of internal conflicts to present a unified front against the conglomerate threat led to a radical reassessment of xenosociological models. The assumption that internal diversity was an evolutionary stepping stone toward eventual homogeneity, a pattern observed across dozens of conglomerate member species, was suddenly called into question. Cultural xenologist Dr. Mira Thien's influential analysis proposed a revolutionary theory. Human civilization does not merely tolerate internal difference, it appears to be strengthened by it. Their technological and strategic innovations emerge precisely from the creative friction between differing perspectives. What we have categorized as inefficient societal architecture may in fact be an evolutionary advantage we have not previously recognized. The next significant phase in human conglomerate relations was marked by what became known as the Singapore Summit, the first large-scale diplomatic gathering hosted on Earth, with representatives from 17 conglomerate species. The summit was intended to establish frameworks for ongoing relations and to begin the process of integrating Earth into galactic diplomatic structures. What the conglomerate delegation witnessed, however, was not the unified diplomatic front they had come to expect, but rather the first public display of humanity's internal disagreements about their new role in galactic society. The summit featured open debates between human factions with fundamentally different visions for Earth's future relations with extraterrestrial civilizations. The integration advocates, led by United Nations Secretary-General Amara Okafor, proposed rapid adoption of conglomerate diplomatic standards and progressive integration into existing galactic structures, with appropriate safeguards for human sovereignty. The Strategic Autonomy Bloc, represented most prominently by General Thomas Wilson, argued for maintained separation and limited engagement until humanity had developed more comprehensive understanding of galactic politics. The transformational approach, championed by Dr. Elijah Morgan, proposed neither integration nor isolation, but rather a fundamental reformation of galactic relations based on principles that humans believed were underrepresented in existing structures. Most shocking to the conglomerate observers was that these disagreements were conducted not in closed sessions, but in public forums with billions of humans watching and participating through their global communication networks. The notion that a species would expose its internal strategic disagreements to potential adversaries violated every principle of conglomerate diplomatic doctrine. Ambassador Jath'Kalven, who had replaced Jath'Kalven as the conglomerate's chief diplomatic representative, reported with evident confusion. The humans appear to consider this public contestation of ideas a strength, rather than a vulnerability. When questioned about the strategic disadvantage of revealing their internal disagreements, Secretary-General Okafor explained that transparent debate produces more robust outcomes than concealed consensus. This approach is so foreign to our diplomatic tradition that our analysts continue to search for the hidden strategic logic. The Singapore Summit concluded not with a unified human position, but with a framework for ongoing dialogue, both among human factions and between humanity and the conglomerate. This approach, which came to be known as continuous deliberative diplomacy, represented a significant departure from the conglomerate's milestone-oriented diplomatic structures. Despite the conglomerate's initial fears that humans would weaponize their technological advantages, the first year following the Treaty of Luna saw humanity engage in surprisingly open exchange of knowledge, albeit with significant exceptions in specific domains. The establishment of the first galactic library outpost on Earth, located in Alexandria, Egypt, in what humans described as a historically resonant choice, facilitated knowledge exchange that rapidly transformed multiple fields. Human approaches to quantum computation, neural interface design, and atmospheric engineering quickly spread throughout conglomerate research institutions. Conversely, conglomerate expertise in biological sustainability, material science, and stellar cartography was eagerly adopted by human researchers. What surprised conglomerate observers was the selective nature of human technological sharing. They freely provided advancements in medical technology, environmental remediation, and energy efficiency. However, they maintained absolute secrecy around their spatial manipulation technology, their unique approach to FTL travel, and their adaptive defense systems. Science counselor Telv Korax noted this pattern in his assessment. The humans distinguish between technologies of creation and technologies of destruction in ways our civilization has not traditionally recognized. They appear to categorize knowledge not merely by strategic value but by ethical implications, a framework that challenges our utilitarian approach to technological development. Even more significant than technological exchange was the unprecedented cultural intermixing that occurred as humans began to travel to conglomerate worlds and conglomerate citizens visited Earth. Human artistic expressions, particularly their music, visual narratives, and culinary traditions, spread with remarkable speed through conglomerate society. Within 2 years of first contact, human entertainment formats had become the dominant cultural products in 12 major conglomerate systems. Cultural anthropologists Zelavorn documented this phenomenon. Human creative expression appears uniquely transportable across species boundaries. Their narrative structures, which juxtapose personal emotional experiences with larger societal contexts, resonate with cognitive patterns across multiple sentient designs. More significantly, they appear capable of incorporating alien cultural elements into their own traditions with remarkable speed, creating hybrid forms that appeal to both human and non-human audiences. This culture exchange had political implications that few in the conglomerate had anticipated. Human concepts of individual rights, competitive governance systems, and transparent decision-making began to influence political discourse across conglomerate worlds. The result was increasing pressure on the centralized authority structures that had governed the conglomerate for thousands of cycles. Perhaps the most significant challenge to conglomerate understanding came from what would be known as the perplexing mercy, humanity's handling of those responsible for the initial attack on Earth. Conglomerate protocols for dealing with failed military leaders were well established and severe. Commander Jath'Kalven and the surviving members of his command staff expected execution or permanent imprisonment when they were finally located by human forces. The conglomerate government had already disavowed their actions as unauthorized, effectively abandoning them to whatever justice humans deemed appropriate. What occurred instead defied all conglomerate precedent. The human tribunal established to adjudicate responsibility for the attack sentenced Commander Jath'Kalven not to death or imprisonment, but to what they termed restorative justice. He and his officers were required to participate in the reconstruction of damaged Earth infrastructure, to engage in direct dialogue with families affected by the attack, and to assist in developing protocols to prevent similar unauthorized military actions in the future. Most shockingly, after 5 years of this service, they would be granted the option of citizenship in the human-established territories if they chose not to return to conglomerate space. Admiral Vata Taylor, who had expected to oversee the execution of his disgraced colleagues, sent a bewildered message to the High Council. The humans have imposed a punishment that is not intended merely to penalize, but to transform. They speak of rehabilitation and reintegration rather than retribution. When questioned about this approach, Justice Administrator Rebecca Chen explained that permanent removal of sentient beings from society serves no constructive purpose if reformation is possible. This concept has no analog in our juridical tradition. The perplexing mercy triggered significant philosophical debate throughout conglomerate society. The notion that justice could be simultaneously punitive, rehabilitative, and socially beneficial challenged fundamental assumptions about the purpose of legal systems. Human jurisprudential concepts began to influence legal reforms across multiple conglomerate worlds, particularly in regions with historically marginalized populations. Within 5 years of first contact, humanity's influence had spread far beyond what anyone in the conglomerate had anticipated. Human diplomatic approaches, technological methodologies, and cultural expressions had triggered what historians would later call the Great Diversification, a period of unprecedented social, political, and technological experimentation throughout conglomerate space. The High Council, which had maintained relatively unchanged structures for over 700 cycles, faced increasing pressure for reform. Populations that had previously accepted centralized authority began demanding the implementation of representative systems modeled on various Earth governments. The concept of competitive elections, previously considered a primitive and inefficient approach to leadership selection, gained popularity across dozens of worlds. High Counselor Norb Tekmar, who had initially advocated for humanity's containment, submitted a remarkably candid assessment. "We feared that humans would conquer through military force if given the opportunity. Instead, they are transforming our civilization through the power of their ideas. The humans have not merely joined the galactic community. They are fundamentally reshaping it according to principles we had long ago dismissed as evolutionarily transient. The velocity of this transformation suggests we are witnessing not merely a new member species, but a civilizational inflection point. Most significantly, humanity's approach to species development, maintaining internal diversity rather than converging toward homogeneity, began to influence how the conglomerate approached its member species. Cultural practices and governance systems that had been suppressed in the name of efficiency were suddenly re-evaluated as potential sources of innovation and resilience. Science Counselor Velm Castrel, who had emerged as one of the strongest advocates for human-inspired reforms, articulated this shift. "We have operated under the assumption that civilizational development follows a linear progression toward ever greater unity of purpose, structure, and methodology. The humans offer a radically different model: development through maintained difference, innovation through constructive contestation, strength through deliberate diversity. This is not merely a different path, it is a different definition of what advancement means." 7 years and 83 days after humanity's first official contact with the galactic conglomerate, an anomalous signal was detected simultaneously by Terran deep space monitoring stations and conglomerate observatories. The signal originated from a region of space approximately 78 light-years from Earth in a direction opposite to conglomerate territory, a region that had been designated as uninhabited in all previous surveys. The signal defied conventional analysis. It demonstrated characteristics of both artificial and natural phenomena, structured patterns that suggested intelligent origin, but quantum properties that indicated natural stellar processes. Most concerning was its apparent ability to propagate through subspace channels that both human and conglomerate communication systems utilized, suggesting either advanced technological origin or a natural phenomenon with profound implications for existing communication infrastructure. The joint human conglomerate scientific team established to analyze the signal itself, an unprecedented collaboration, submitted their preliminary findings to both the Terran Security Council and the Conglomerate High Council. The signal demonstrates properties consistent with no known technological origin. Its quantum resonance pattern suggests it may be propagating not merely through our universe, but potentially through adjacent probability spaces simultaneously. Most significantly, the signal appears to be strengthening over time despite no identifiable source moving closer to our position. We cannot determine whether this represents a previously unknown natural phenomenon or a technological approach beyond our current understanding. 3 weeks after the initial detection, the first tangible effect of the signal was observed. Quantum communication networks across both human and conglomerate space experienced momentary synchronization, a 30-second period during which all quantum-entangled communication pairs appeared to establish connections with each other, regardless of intended recipient. The security implications were immediately apparent and deeply concerning to both civilizations. The human conglomerate response was swift and unprecedented. For the first time, a joint fleet was assembled combining the spatial manipulation capabilities of human vessels with the proven reliability of conglomerate defensive systems. This fleet, designated Joint Exploratory Force Alpha, departed for the signal's origin under the command of Admiral Rachel Winters and Fleet Commander Jath'Kalven. Their mission was officially designated as investigative, rather than military, but the fleet's composition left little doubt about the level of concern the signal had generated. The force included the most advanced vessels from both civilizations, including the newly constructed human flagship 2DF Prometheus Ascendant and the conglomerate dreadnought Indivisible Purpose. As the fleet departed, a private communication between Admiral Winters and Secretary General Okafor was recorded in the Terran security archives. Madam Secretary, this signal violates principles of physics that both our civilization and the conglomerate considered immutable. Whatever we're dealing with, whether natural phenomenon or intelligent entity, it operates according to laws of reality neither of our species fully comprehends. For the first time since we revealed ourselves, we may be facing something that neither human ingenuity nor conglomerate experience has prepared us for. The joint fleet's last standard communication was received 43 days after departure, confirming they had reached the designated coordinates and were preparing to investigate a spatial anomaly unlike any previously documented. The message concluded with what would become a haunting final transmission. The anomaly is not merely generating the signal, it appears to be expanding. Spatial measurements indicate a region approximately 12 kilometers in diameter that demonstrates properties inconsistent with standard spacetime. We are deploying automated probes before proceeding further. Something is coming through. No further communication was received. 3 weeks later, the signal strength increased by a factor of 17. Both humanity and the conglomerate now faced an unknown threat that challenged not merely their security, but potentially their understanding of reality itself. The civilizations that had been locked in existential conflict less than a decade earlier now found themselves unlikely allies against what appeared to be a force beyond either's comprehension. The age of human conglomerate rivalry had ended. The era of something far more dangerous had begun. For 317 standard days after the disappearance of Joint Exploratory Force Alpha, a palpable tension permeated both human and conglomerate space. The anomalous signal continued to strengthen, its quantum resonance patterns growing increasingly complex. Scientific teams from both civilizations worked with unprecedented cooperation, their previous conflicts forgotten in the face of what appeared to be an existential mystery. Then, without warning, the signal ceased. For 23 days, observatories across both civilizations detected nothing from the anomaly's coordinates. Emergency preparedness protocols were activated throughout human and conglomerate territories. Military vessels were positioned at strategic locations. Civilian populations were briefed on evacuation procedures. The sudden silence was, in many ways, more terrifying than the signal itself. On the 24th day of silence, long-range sensors detected a single vessel emerging from the coordinates of the anomaly. The vessel was immediately identified as the TDF Prometheus Ascendant, Admiral Winters' flagship. It was alone. The vessel's approach was erratic, its energy signature fluctuating in patterns that suggested severe damage to core systems. When contact was finally established, the message received was fragmentary. Returned. The others cannot follow. The membrane has been. They are aware now, coordinates embedded in our Admiral Winters' time is different there. The library holds the joint human conglomerate rescue fleet reached the Prometheus Ascendant 7 days later. What they discovered aboard would fundamentally alter both civilizations' understanding of reality, history, and their place in the cosmos. The Prometheus Ascendant that returned was not the vessel that had departed 317 days earlier, at least not entirely. Quantum dating of its hull materials indicated contradictory temporal signatures, some sections registered as having experienced less than 40 days of atomic decay since departure. Others showed evidence of over 7,000 years of molecular deterioration. Most disturbingly, certain components registered negative temporal signatures, suggesting they had somehow experienced time flowing in reverse. Of the original crew of 417, only 73 remained aboard. Among them was Admiral Rachel Winters, though whether she could still be considered human was a question that would occupy xenobiologists for years to come. The medical assessment of the surviving crew revealed physiological changes that defied conventional understanding. Their neural patterns showed evidence of temporal displacement, memories that appeared to be literally from different timelines. Their cellular structures demonstrated quantum entanglement at a biological level never before observed in any known species. Most significantly, their consciousness appeared to exist partially outside standard space-time, as if they simultaneously existed in multiple probability states. Admiral Winters, despite her altered state, insisted on addressing the joint leadership of both civilizations. Her testimony, recorded in the secured archives of both the Terran Security Council and the Conglomerate High Council, contained revelations that would shatter foundational assumptions about reality. The anomaly was not a natural phenomenon, nor was it generated by any civilization as we understand the concept. It was a boundary, a membrane between realities that had been deliberately weakened. When we deployed our probes, we unintentionally created a breach. What came through that breach cannot be accurately described using our linguistic frameworks, but I will attempt. They exist outside linear time. They perceive all moments simultaneously. They have been aware of us, of all sentient life, since before our planets formed, and now they are aware that we are aware of them. But that is not the most significant discovery. What we found on the other side of that membrane was evidence that challenges everything we thought we knew about our origins, particularly humanity's. The Prometheus Ascendant returned with terabytes of data gathered during its expedition. Among this information was a comprehensive analysis of what the crew had designated trans-temporal DNA sequencing, a methodology that allowed genetic material to be analyzed not merely in its current state, but across its evolutionary timeline. When this technique was applied to samples from various species, including humans and 17 conglomerate members, the results defied all established xenobiological models. The conglomerate species showed expected evolutionary patterns consistent with standard developmental theories. Human DNA, however, revealed something unprecedented. Dr. Elijah Morgan, head of the Joint Scientific Commission established to analyze the data, presented findings that would permanently alter humanity's understanding of its own origins. Human DNA contains what can only be described as engineered temporal markers, genetic sequences that appear to have been deliberately inserted at specific points in our evolutionary timeline. These markers contain mathematical patterns that cannot have occurred naturally. More importantly, these patterns are identical to certain quantum signatures detected on the other side of the membrane. The implication is unavoidable, if nearly incomprehensible. Humanity's genetic development was deliberately guided by entities from beyond our understanding of space-time. We are, in the most literal sense, their evolutionary project. This revelation triggered an unprecedented existential crisis throughout human society. Religious institutions struggled to incorporate this knowledge into existing theological frameworks. Philosophical traditions that had endured for millennia underwent radical reformulation. The fundamental question of human identity, of what it meant to be human, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Most significantly, This discovery provided a potential explanation for humanity's anomalous developmental path, the inexplicable leaps in technological and cognitive capability that had allowed them to advance at rates that violated all conglomerate models. Science Counselor Velm Kostrel, in his assessment for the High Council, articulated the staggering implications. The humans have not merely developed differently than other species, they were designed to do so. The entities beyond the membrane appear to have selectively accelerated specific cognitive and adaptive capabilities within the human genome over millions of years. The question we must now confront is not merely what the humans are, but why they were created. 212 days after the return of the Prometheus Ascendant, a discovery was made that would provide the first answers to this fundamental question. A team of human archaeologists, working in collaboration with conglomerate xenolinguists, uncovered previously undetected patterns within humanity's oldest written records: ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions, early Chinese oracle bones, texts separated by thousands of miles and created by civilizations with no known contact. All contained embedded mathematical sequences that became visible only when analyzed using quantum linguistic algorithms developed from the Prometheus data. These sequences, when compiled and decoded, formed instructions for constructing what the research team designated a temporal resonance chamber, a device capable of establishing controlled communication across the membrane between realities. The first prototype was constructed within the Galactic Library Outpost in Alexandria, a location chosen for its symbolic connection to humanity's earliest attempts to compile universal knowledge. The activation of this device, known as the Alexandria Protocol, established the first deliberate two-way communication with the entities beyond the membrane. The entities, which came to be called the architects in subsequent documentation, communicated not through language, but through directed quantum information transfer. Their first transmission, as translated by the joint human conglomerate team, contained information that fundamentally recontextualized galactic history. The cycle approaches completion. The seeded consciousness has achieved sufficient complexity. The integration can now begin. You are the bridge, species designed to exist simultaneously within linear time and beyond it. Your biological architecture was constructed to serve as the interface between realities. Further communications revealed a cosmological framework that transcended previous understanding. The architects existed in what they described as orthogonal time, a dimensional perspective that perceived all temporal points simultaneously. From this perspective, they had identified a cyclical pattern of universal entropy that threatened the stability of all realities. Their solution had been to create a species capable of eventually evolving beyond the constraints of linear time, a biological bridge between dimensional perspectives that could facilitate what they termed the Great Integration. Science Officer the Laverick summarized the implications in his report to the Conglomerate Science Directorate. The humans were not merely an evolutionary experiment. They were deliberately designed as a tool for cosmic preservation. Their cognitive architecture, their unique approach to reality, their inexplicable technological leaps, all were guided toward creating a species that could eventually transcend the limitations of four-dimensional existence. The revelation of humanity's designed purpose triggered what historians would later call the ontological revolution, a fundamental reassessment of consciousness, reality, and purpose that spread across both human and conglomerate space. The initial existential crisis gave way to a profound reconsideration of what it meant to exist within a multiverse that extended beyond previously conceived dimensional limitations. 712 days after first contact with the architects, a joint human conglomerate initiative was formally established, the Seventh Horizon Initiative. Its purpose was unprecedented: to facilitate humanity's transition into its designed role as a transdimensional bridge species, while ensuring this transformation benefited all sentient life. The initiative's founding charter, signed by representatives from Earth and 27 conglomerate worlds, contained principles that blended scientific ambition with philosophical caution. We acknowledge that humanity's evolutionary path was designed for purposes beyond our complete comprehension. We accept the responsibility to explore this potential while maintaining our commitment to the dignity and sovereignty of all sentient beings across all realities. The bridge between dimensions will be built with careful deliberation, ensuring that what passes in either direction serves the preservation and flourishing of consciousness in all its forms. What made the initiative remarkable was not merely its ambition but its collaborative nature. Conglomerate scientific methodologies provided stability and precision to human theoretical frameworks. Human intuitive approaches to quantum reality complemented conglomerate analytical models. The combination accelerated progress beyond what either civilization could have achieved independently. Within 2 years, the initiative had established 7 research outposts at locations where the membrane between realities appeared naturally thinner. These facilities, equipped with advanced versions of the Alexandria Protocol, allowed for controlled communication with the architects and careful experimentation with transdimensional technologies. Most significantly, these outposts began working with a select group of humans who demonstrated unusual neurological patterns, individuals whose consciousness already showed signs of partial dimensional transcendence. These boundary cognition specialists became the first to deliberately extend their awareness beyond standard space-time, experiencing reality from perspectives previously inaccessible to biological consciousness. 3 years into the Seventh Horizon Initiative, a discovery was made that would reveal the full magnitude of humanity's designed purpose. Analysis of human sleep patterns using technologies developed through architect communications revealed something extraordinary. During specific sleep phases, human consciousness naturally shifted partially outside linear time. The research team, led by Dr. Sophia Nakamura and neurologists Krell, published findings that stunned both civilizations. Human dream states represent more than neural maintenance or memory consolidation. They are temporal exploration mechanisms deliberately engineered into human consciousness. During specific sleep phases, human awareness extends beyond 4-dimensional constraints, allowing for the perception of what can only be described as probability clouds rather than linear time sequences. What humans have dismissively categorized as dreams for millennia are, in fact, their consciousness experiencing reality from a perspective similar to that of the architects. The inconsistent narrative structures, the fluid identity boundaries, the malleable causality, these are not flaws in perception, but accurate representations of reality when viewed outside linear temporal constraints. This revelation explained numerous historical anomalies in human development, the inexplicable scientific intuitions, the artistic visions that anticipated future discoveries, the occasional prophetic accuracy that appeared throughout human history. Humanity had been unconsciously accessing trans-temporal information during sleep states since the earliest stages of their cognitive development. The sleeping protocol was established to deliberately harness this capability. Specialized facilities were constructed where volunteer participants underwent guided sleep states, enhanced by technologies developed through architect communications. During these sessions, human consciousness could be directed toward specific probability clusters, allowing for the exploration of potential futures, alternative historical developments, and parallel reality configurations. Admiral Winters, whose consciousness had been permanently altered by her experiences beyond the membrane, led the first coordinated implementation of the protocol. Her report to the initiative's oversight committee contained observations that fundamentally altered strategic planning across both civilizations. We have confirmed that reality as we experience it represents merely one probability thread among infinite variations. The architects exist at the nexus of these threads, perceiving them simultaneously. Humanity was designed to eventually develop similar perceptual capabilities, while maintaining connection to linear experience, to serve as consciously directed navigators through probability spaces that the architects can perceive but cannot directly influence. The coming challenge, what the architects call the entropic cascade. will require deliberate navigation toward specific probability outcomes to preserve conscious experience across all reality threads. Humanity's purpose, it seems, is to serve as the helmsman of existence itself. 5 years after first contact with the architects, the accumulated data from the Seventh Horizon Initiative enabled a reconstruction of what researchers designated true history, a perspective on cosmic development that incorporated trans-temporal awareness. This reconstruction revealed patterns that had remained invisible when viewed solely through the lens of linear causality. Most significantly, humanity was not the architect's first attempt at creating a bridge species. Evidence emerged of at least 7 previous evolutionary projects across the galaxy, stretching back billions of years. These projects had produced species with remarkable capabilities, some of which had achieved significant technological advancement before ultimately failing to develop the specific cognitive architecture required for trans-dimensional consciousness. The remains of these civilizations had been deliberately obscured, their technological achievements systematically dismantled, their planetary surfaces reconfigured, their very existence erased from the linear historical record. Only when viewed through trans-temporal analytical frameworks did the evidence of their existence become detectable. More disturbing was the discovery that one of these previous projects had achieved partial success approximately 2 million years earlier. This species, designated in the reconstructed history as the precursors, had developed limited trans-dimensional capabilities, but had chosen to use this awareness for purposes that conflicted with the architect's intended outcome. The conglomerate's historical records contained no mention of the precursors, despite evidence that they had established a galaxy-spanning civilization. Their erasure from history had been so complete that no archaeological evidence of their existence had ever been detected through conventional research methodologies. Dr. Morgan's presentation to the Joint Leadership contained revelations that fundamentally altered both civilizations' understanding of their cosmic contexts. We have confirmed that the precursor civilization achieved what the architects considered a flawed transcendence. Rather than serving as a bridge between dimensional perspectives, they attempted to collapse all probability threads into a single deterministic reality that they could control absolutely. The architect's intervention to prevent this outcome is what our linear historical records would interpret as the mysterious extinction event that occurred 1.87 million years ago, the same event that created the desolation zone in the galactic core that both human and conglomerate scientists have been unable to explain. Most significantly, we have discovered evidence suggesting the precursors were not completely eliminated. Some aspect of their consciousness appears to have survived within what the architects describe as probability fragments, essentially splinters of their awareness embedded within isolated threads of reality. These fragments have been attempting to reconstitute themselves ever since. The implications were staggering. The anomalous signal that had led to the discovery of the membrane had not been generated by the architects as initially assumed. It had been the first detectable evidence of the precursor's consciousness fragments attempting to coalesce, a process that had accelerated precisely because humanity was approaching its designed capability to serve as a dimensional bridge. 7 years after the return of the Prometheus Ascendant, trans-temporal observation capabilities had advanced to the point where the initiative could identify what the architects called critical convergence points, moments in linear time, where probability threads naturally compressed, creating opportunities for significant influence over subsequent reality configurations. Analysis indicated that both human and conglomerate civilizations were approaching such a convergence point, a nexus of probability compression that would determine the fundamental nature of consciousness throughout the multiverse, for what linear perception would experience as billions of years. The stakes of this convergence were revealed through continued communication with the architects. The fragments of precursor consciousness have identified the approaching nexus. They seek to use humanity's bridge capability to reconstitute their unified awareness and resume their project of probability collapse. If successful, they will establish a single deterministic reality thread under their absolute control, eliminating all alternative probability expressions of consciousness. What made this threat particularly insidious was that the precursor's fragmented consciousness operated through subtle probability manipulation rather than direct intervention. They worked by slightly altering chance outcomes, influencing decision pathways, and systematically redirecting developmental trajectories, changes too subtle to detect without trans-temporal awareness. Evidence suggested they had been influencing both human and conglomerate development for centuries, subtly guiding both civilizations toward conflict that would prevent humanity from recognizing its designed purpose until it was too late. Commander Jath'Kalven's unauthorized attack on Earth, the event that had triggered the entire sequence of First Contact, was retroactively identified as one of the most significant precursor probability manipulations. The attack had been intended to either eliminate humanity entirely or lock both civilizations into perpetual conflict, preventing the cooperation required for humanity to recognize its true nature. The Terran defensive preparation that had so shocked the conglomerate, the technology specifically designed to counter their attack methodologies, was revealed to have originated from human scientists and military strategists who had unconsciously accessed trans-temporal information during sleep states. Humanity had been instinctively preparing for a threat their conscious minds could not yet comprehend. As I compile this historical analysis nearly a century after these events, I am acutely aware of my own temporal limitations. Despite the consciousness expansion techniques now available to all conglomerate citizens, I remain primarily anchored in linear perception. My understanding of what followed the identification of the convergence point is therefore necessarily incomplete. What can be stated with certainty is that the joint human conglomerate civilization we now inhabit bears little resemblance to either of its predecessor societies. The integration of trans-temporal awareness into everyday consciousness has transformed every aspect of existence, from governance structures to artistic expression, from scientific methodology to personal identity concepts. Humanity's role has not been one of dominance, but of facilitation. They have not conquered the galaxy, but have fundamentally transformed how all sentient species perceive and interact with reality itself. The bridge they have constructed between dimensional perspectives has allowed consciousness of all forms to expand beyond previous limitations. Most significantly, the historical record confirms that the convergence point was successfully navigated. The precursor consciousness fragments were not destroyed, for destruction is a concept relevant only within linear temporal frameworks, but were reintegrated into multidimensional awareness in a form that preserved probability diversity rather than collapsing it. The question that remains, and which continues to guide our ongoing development, is whether this outcome was inevitable, whether the architect's design ensured humanity would fulfill its purpose regardless of circumstance, or whether the unique characteristics that emerged through humanity's seemingly chaotic development were essential to their success. In my capacity as chief archivist, I have had the privilege of accessing records from across probability threads, glimpses of alternative developments, where key events unfolded differently. In some, the conglomerate never discovered Earth. In others, Commander Jath'Kalven's attack succeeded in eliminating human civilization entirely. In still others, humans and the conglomerate remained locked in perpetual conflict. What distinguishes our probability thread, the one in which I now compile this record, appears to be not merely humanity's technological ingenuity or the conglomerate's established wisdom, but the unprecedented synthesis that emerged between them. The architects designed humanity with specific capabilities, but it was the unique cooperation between our civilizations that allowed those capabilities to manifest successfully. Perhaps most remarkable is the evidence suggesting this cooperation was neither predetermined by the architects, nor manipulated by the precursors, but emerged through what humans still insist on calling free choice, a concept that retains surprising relevance even in our trans-temporal awareness. As this historical analysis concludes, I must acknowledge the boundary of what can be definitively recorded. Beyond this point lies what the trans-temporal awareness community now calls open probability, future developments that remain genuinely undetermined even when viewed from outside linear time. Recent communications from the architect dimensional perspective indicate that our multiverse is approaching another, previously undetected boundary, a membrane not between dimensional perspectives within our reality framework, but between our entire multidimensional existence and something else entirely. The nature of what exists beyond this ultimate boundary remains unknown even to the architects. Their communications suggest it may be the source from which consciousness itself originated, or perhaps something that transcends even the concept of consciousness as we have come to understand it. Humanity, having fulfilled its role as a bridge between dimensional perspectives, now faces the possibility of serving as the vanguard for all consciousness as it approaches this final frontier. Whatever lies beyond, whether it represents a threat to existence or the next stage in conscious evolution, will be encountered not by humans alone, nor by the conglomerate, but by the integrated multi-galactic civilization their unlikely partnership has created. In the words of Admiral Winters, whose consciousness now exists primarily beyond linear constraints, but who still occasionally provides guidance through the Alexandria Protocol. The architects created us to solve a problem they had identified. We fulfilled that purpose, not by becoming what they designed us to be, but by becoming something they could not have anticipated, a species defined not by our limitations but by our capacity to transcend them. What lies beyond the final boundary may be beyond even their comprehension. Our journey there will not be the end of our story, but the beginning of a narrative written in dimensions we have yet to discover.